How you doing?
I feel tired.
Yeah,
I'm exhausted from the week.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, so I went on a trip to Montreal by myself, no kids, for work. I mean, our company hosts a team-wide retreat once a year. Yeah, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you got to be here with the kids all by yourself
On the last full week of school.
Yeah, last week of school.
When there are billions of moving parts.
Yeah. So
I feel like I could sleep for days right now.
you should have plenty of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt bad because I got home yesterday. I came home from the retreat so that I could catch a choir solo for one of our boys, and he crushed it. He did an amazing job.
Yeah, he really did. He also won an award.
He did, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, so I made it back for that. But I was coming off of like 3.5 or 4 hours of sleep. And so I was pretty much useless yesterday.
Yeah. But you're going to do dinner tonight. So there's a victory because during the week, you take like 3 of the dinners and I take 2 of them. So just having, I had to take 4 this week. And I was just like, well, I mean, it's just all the meals, it's that you're doing dinner, you're doing all of the after dinner chores, you're wrangling kids into bed, and then you're like getting them ready for school, making sure they're not late. Like it's a lot. It's a lot to manage. So
yeah, it is. And even, the older they get, the more
it was easier this year, than it was last year.
Yeah, but still, like, you have to be the director of everything that goes on.
Yeah. Because they're still they're still incapable of doing their own, like getting themselves ready. The 16-year-old, I had to go into his room like 4 times to wake him up, So, yeah.
All right. Well, but I'm back. It was a super fun retreat. I had never been to. It was in Montreal. I had never been to Canada before. And one of my coworkers, I think, described Montreal best, or at least the funniest way. He said Montreal is like if Americans tried to imagine what French architecture looks like, and so like it's a French city, primarily, predominantly, and so there are a lot of beautiful buildings, and then like kind of mixed in are these very American looking buildings. Which is, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this is I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here. I'm not sure if this is a French thing, but I always associate French with kind of art and artistic, but also, kind of on the sensual side of art, if that makes sense. Like it has those associations.
Yeah.
And so it was really weird. I came back to my room the first day. I came back kind of like a little bit before dinner, and the room had been cleaned again. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like the bed was, I had taken a short nap. And this is how I knew. So the bed was made again, and I was like, oh, somebody was in here and they cleaned up. And I'm used to that being like, oh, that's it. You get one.
One cleaning a day, if that.
Right. So I came back to my room and I walked in, and the TV is on. There are chocolates on the bed. So somebody had come in again, but the TV was on, and that was the thing that was like weird to me. I was like, somebody came in my room and turned on the TV, because I pretty much never turn on the TV. And what was playing on the TV was this really like bizarre, there was kind of this spa music, like really kind of Zen sort of. But there were these two actors, I guess, a man and a woman, and they were like kind of writhing and like in different contorted poses and stuff like that. It with also like on the screen these like really close up liquid kind of and flowers and
interesting.
But it was, and it was very artistic kind of, but everybody on our team had the same experience. We found out afterwards, like people were like, what the heck is on my TV and why is it on?
That's funny.
So I found out later, because I was curious, the hotel commissioned a art studio that they do art installations, and they also do like immersive artistic experiences, but they also do some technological artistic stuff with VR. And they actually have a VR experience that's going on in Houston. Like they've done it, like they have it installed in a bunch of different places, and Houston is one of the places. So yeah, the studio, and it's just down the street from the hotel. They produced it, I guess, just for the purpose of having it play on the television for the guests.
I mean, hey.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of,
why not?
Yeah, it's kind of cool, like when you understand the reasoning behind it. But it was also just a very weird, different experience.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why I told that story.
Yeah.
But we need to get into today's topic. So I'm going to go ahead and start the show.
All right.
And we're going to do it. Hello, and welcome to the In the Boat with Ben and Rachel podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Rachel.
And today we are talking about the role of trauma and using art and creativity. Sorry, the role of art and creativity, not the role of trauma.
Yeah, you don't want trauma.
Yeah.
But
the role of art and creativity in processing through trauma. And I also should say up at the top that this is the last episode of this season. We are about to go on kind of a whirlwind adventure here at the very beginning of the summer because
I have a book releasing.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to grab it off of So this is the actual book. It's our logo's in the way.
Yeah.
I'm just going to get rid of it if I can. There we go. This is the actual book, the hardcover with the jacket and everything. I also really like the color of the book itself.
So bright and hopeful. Yeah.
So this will be available on May 30th.
But pre-orders are welcome.
Yeah, go pre-order the book so you get your copy right away.
Yep.
We delivered some of these already to
some
students.
Yeah.
Who pre-ordered the book from your author visits.
Yeah.
So, and the book is relevant to today's topic too, because it was the stories and some of the situations were kind of your way of working through and telling the story of and talking about some of the traumatic experiences you had as a kid. So I guess I would love to start there. And I think the assumption of this episode is that art and creativity can and are useful tools for working through your past hurts. And we're going to get into a little bit more of how art does that. But first, I wanted to talk about your book, and I wanted to ask this question: Was there kind of an intuitive journey into telling these stories, or was it something that as you started to work through the stories, you kind of discovered that it was helping you process through stuff?
I mean, I think it was something where I knew it was a story I wanted to tell. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say that this story is my story completely, you know,
right.
Like I share similarities of the things that the main character goes through. And I think I think the first thing that made me want to tell the story was I was thinking about periods and first periods in particular, because in middle grade, you're kind of dealing with that age group. Kids are going through puberty and their, you know, like bodies are changing. It's a very awkward time. Girls are like, you know, expecting to get their periods and stuff. And so it made me think about talking more about those things, which led me to thinking about my first period, which was a very traumatic experience for me. Because my parents had divorced. I was going to visit my dad. My mom suspected that I might start my period while I was visiting him for the month. And so she sent me with some supplies, but it wasn't nearly enough. And that's the story that I tell in The First Magnificent Summer, where the girl is away from her mom. She's with people she doesn't know. And she starts her first period, which can be a very traumatic thing and a very lonely thing when you don't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
And it's scary, you know, like it's a scary thing. It's a scary transition into young womanhood. So that was kind of the impetus for the story. I knew that it was something that other girls have experienced, and I wanted to tell that story so that they could feel seen and know that, you know, there were others who had been through that and also made it out alive, so to speak. But then as I started writing it, it was very cathartic for me because I could explore some of those emotions. And like one of the things that's very true in the story is how panicked she felt when she was counting down supplies, because she only had a certain number and she didn't know anything about periods, like how long did they last and how do you change out supplies and how often should you, you know? And so it's a very panicky, anxiety inducing thing. And I tried to explore some of that just from my past experience, you know?
Yeah.
So
I want to say a few words about trauma because I want to make sure that we frame this correctly. Trauma is and can be an emotional experience, but I think it's often reduced just to that. But it's actually a physiological phenomenon. It's a connection between your brain and your body that has to do with things that you experience really at any age that trigger a certain part of your brain to produce a physical response. And that physical response can be the same kinds of things you experience when you're very afraid or when you feel panicked or and so you'll hear a lot of people who struggle with anxiety, for example, talk about having panic attacks. And sometimes that's linked to a past trauma. And that trauma might be something as simple as there was a sound that happened when that person experienced something very scary or harmful or dangerous, and the brain registered that sound and filed it away for some future date 10 years later when they'd hear that sound again, and their bodies would freak out because what the brain thinks is, oh, I'm hearing that sound again. That thing that happened that was so horrible is happening again. And so that's really kind of oversimplifying it because it's a lot more complex than that. There are a lot of factors. Sometimes it's, something that physical that was done to you. Sometimes it's a situation that you were in when you didn't feel safe. Sometimes it's the way that somebody was speaking to you. And so there are a lot of different ways that trauma manifests. But the most important way to think about it is not that, oh, you're just not being emotionally tough, but it's literally negative associations in your brain that create a physical response that end up making it makes life harder because it blocks access to certain things. It might keep you from building relationships with people. It has a lot of negative effects if it's not dealt with. And one of the best ways to deal with trauma is to actually talk to a professional therapist and work through that, because they will often have techniques and tools to help you actually work through those things. But art and creativity can be one of the tools that you use.
Well, and I will say that as I was writing this book and the sequel that comes after this, I worked with a licensed professional counselor just to make sure I could handle it, because there are some really deep things in these books and some... Yeah,
It's okay.
Just past hurts that that need to be worked through, not just in art, but with somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And like I never worked on the projects without help. I mean during the week, of course, I would work on those projects, but there was never a point where I was like, yeah, I can handle this on my own.
Yeah. And it may be for this project specifically, it's something that you're sharing with the world. And that's kind of the intention too.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely something that's responsible and, like it's responsible and it's thoughtful to not just, dump your trauma into an artistic project and you're like, here's, sharing it with the world, here's all my trauma kind of thing. So working through it with somebody while you're in the process of turning it into something that you do intend to share, I think is responsible because it allows you to infuse that art with the things that have helped you heal.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is it helps you get to a place of hope, like communicating hope through the art, which is not where you were when you experienced the trauma,
Yeah.
So because nobody wants a piece of art that is so depressing that you like nobody can connect with it, It's like you want to read that story, but you also want to have some kind of hope that like the person in this story is okay,
Well, and I mean, from the perspective of like trying to tell good stories and stuff like that, you never want to do something that will pull them out of the story. And so not that that's the important thing, but if you, I don't know, it's not overdoing it, but if you're sharing it in a way that it's clear that, wow, the person who wrote this might not be okay.
Yeah.
It's like, that's going to take you out of the story.
Well, and even now, my therapist and I are still working through some of the things that I have been through as a kid. And she actually said the other day, like, you write all of your hopes into the books, but you don't take that for yourself. And I think that's what, gosh dang it. That's what art can do though, is it can help you find the hope that you have for recovery as well. So,
well, and I think what happens often, we started off talking about what trauma is and how complicated it is. And I think it can be very difficult to articulate the things that you're experiencing and feeling, and how that trauma has affected you.
Oh yeah.
And what the things that you wish had been different, and the things that you hope for your future. And art expands your vocabulary. It gives you, in some cases, in a very real way, it gives you a voice and a language through which you can actually express those hopes and those desires. And so I think it's important for folks to know that, and this is because not everybody has access to therapy. I think it's important to know that you can use art to express how you're feeling at any stage in the process. So if it's very early on and it's really raw and painful, art can still be something that helps you work through that and heal. Or if you're further down the road and you've actually healed a lot, but there's still, like some scarring.
Residual.
Yeah.
The residual things you have to work through the rest of your life. Yeah. And I will say too, sharing art or making art in the beginning stages can really help with self-expression and kind of working through those problems. And it can help you find community, because there are other people who've experienced maybe not the exact same thing you have, but something similar. And just having that community is like a fortifying element of sharing trauma in art and pain in art,
I think that's probably one of my favorite versions of this. And I don't know why, but my mind immediately goes to improv groups.
Yeah.
Or, comedy troupes or whatever. There is kind of, I think if you really looked into it, there's a lot of connection between comedy and trauma.
Oh yeah. Like sadness is one step away from comedy, it's just like,
right.
Or comedy is one step away from sadness.
But it becomes this community where, you're working through and trying to develop your artistic voice, but it's also a safe place where you can be yourself and you can try to finally express some of those things with people who aren't going to be judgmental or, so I think that can be very healthy.
Yeah.
When I thought about this, I remember as a kid going to family counseling and then later.
Oh, did you? I never knew that.
It was for a short period of time. And then
I wish I'd gone to family counseling.
Yeah.
Would have been nice.
I don't remember it a lot.
Yeah.
But then also having taken one of our kids to therapy at a relatively younger age. And, and then you kind of see like kids therapists on TV and they have toys and stuff like that. But it's really interesting to me that the way that they try to help children express the things they're feeling and work through things, it's like, hey, can you draw me a picture? Or, hey, can you, act this out with puppets? Or can you use these figurines and, cars and like little toys to kind of recreate the situation? And for kids, it's like, oh yeah, it's because they're kids and they can't really, they don't have as much, intellectual understanding of their emotions to be able to express them and stuff. But I think we overestimate for adults how good we are at actually talking about the things that we experience.
Well, sometimes we just don't have the words, the hurt is so deep inside that we don't even have the words for it. So, I mean, I'm reading a book right now called The Body Keeps the Score. And I can't remember the author. It's like a huge tome of a book. And But it's all about the trauma that we experience in childhood and how difficult, even as we become adults, how difficult it is to communicate it, you know? And sometimes like we don't even know, we know the feeling, but we don't know the words to express it. So.
Yeah.
Oh, but what is it? Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk is the author. It's really good. It's been very eye-opening to me. It's kind of, I've had a few like, you know, eureka moments where I'm like, that's what I do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But he talks extensively in there about how some of the clients he's worked with just don't have the words to express things, and, you know, they have to like get it out on paper. Or, I mean, writing can really help because it like, you can write a letter to your past self, or you can write a story where you're, you know, it's a character. It wasn't you, it was a character. And those things can be really helpful in working through that hurt and trauma, you know?
Yeah. And it would be nice to get into some of the more specific methods. I can't really speak about it without misrepresenting probably some of the therapeutic methods that are used. But I also, so you mentioned letters like to your past self. And so one of the tools in therapy is using or talking, imagining your past self and thinking about what are the things that I wish somebody my age now would have said to my past self.
Yeah.
And that's always one that gets me like really hard, because I think about my past self and I realize when I actually sit down and I think about, you know, mistakes that I've made or things that happened to me or whatever, like I find that I have mixed emotions, and it's because I'm carrying, you know, still carrying some trauma and shame that was given to me. And so part of therapy is coming to the realization and accepting that shame doesn't belong to you. It's not, it was something that somebody put on you. And so now as a 40-something-year-old, you know, if I were sitting across the table from 12-year-old Ben, now that I understand and have, you know, all of this experience, I look at that kid and I'm like, wow, I'm proud of you for surviving all that you have up to this point, you know, and all of the kind things I would want to say and all of the hopeful things that I would want to share. And like, hey, you can't imagine the kind of future you have waiting for you.
You just
that kind of thing.
Hit on all of the reasons I write for those kids. Like, I don't know why I'm so emotional, but, you know, 10 to 14-year-olds, like, every book I write is so that I can say, man, you're such a cool kid. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying not to go there. I'm trying to keep myself detached.
Yeah. You're messing up my.
We have kids in that age group. Some a little bit older.
Yeah.
On their way, but and I feel like we've done a good job of trying to tell them regularly that that we're proud of them, that they're great kids, that we love them. And still, I think about all of the missed opportunities and that kind of thing, and it's just really hard, you know. I think another thing that happens we're getting a little bit off of the artistic topic, but I'm trying to think about it from a parent's perspective.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for any parent not to feel like they're failing their kid in some way. Like they just can't do enough. And
my stomach is growling. Sorry.
And, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword sort of thing, because on the one hand, we do have a big responsibility as parents, but, you know, on the other hand, we're also human. We're working through stuff. We're healing.
Yeah.
We make mistakes. And I don't think anybody, regardless of how amazing their parents were, what kind of, you know, community they had around them, I don't think anybody escapes childhood without some kind of trauma or harm that they need to work through.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure why I went into that. I guess I don't want.
It means everybody needs to use art to help work through those things.
Yeah. I think though, like as adults working through some of that stuff, it has helped us have a better understanding of what our kids might be going through.
Yeah.
And it's also, I know it makes me really want to give them as much access as possible to ways that they can express their feelings outside of just words.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing that I think for younger people, especially, it's just as important to be able to express your hurt and your sadness as it is to be able to express your hopes and your dreams.
Yeah. And
I think both of those things kind of go hand in hand. You know, processing through trauma isn't just about like, there's this bad thing that happened to me, or that there's this, you know, traumatic experience that I had, but it's also, here's what my future could look like. You know, here's who I could become. If I heal from this, here's how I might do better, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah. When I was talking with my writer friends one day about how, you know, I have a lot of childhood trauma, which gives me a lot of things to choose from when I'm writing stories. And I said, I would still love to have not had, like, sometimes I wonder, what would my brain be like if I hadn't experienced as much trauma as I did? And sometimes I feel a little bit angry about that, because sometimes my brain's is like, you'd probably be more creative. You could, you know, build better worlds in fantasy, and you'd have more of your brain for creativity instead of like trying to work through all this trauma. But my friends reminded me, they said, you know, if you hadn't experienced those things, you wouldn't be writing the books that you have that mean so much to the kids who read them. And it reminded me, I don't like the whole adage, you know, all things happen for a reason and that kind of thing. But it does help when you can see your trauma as a way to help other people as well, you know? And I think that's what art does also, is when we express those things through art, it allows other people, and I've mentioned that before, but it allows other people to kind of gather around that and feel seen and feel heard and feel like they matter too, you know?
Yeah. And that is kind of, you know, one of the more meaningful destinations of using art and creativity as a form of expressing your trauma, is that there are countless other people who have experienced something similar to you, who maybe, because they don't have access to therapy, or they aren't artistic or whatever, or they don't think they're artistic.
Yeah.
They have kept these things bottled up and haven't found a way to articulate them. And you hear all the time people saying, I watched that movie, or I saw that painting, or I read that book, And all of a sudden something just clicked for me. Mm-hmm. And it's because art just connects with the human soul in a way that just, sitting down and trying to talk through things can't. Mm-hmm. I also want to say that it's okay to, I think embracing some of the silver lining and using that as a tool to help heal yourself and heal other people is really positive. But it's also okay, I think, to acknowledge the things that you lost because of your trauma and to grieve those things and to let yourself go through that process. This is and I want to be careful because, it's when I was a kid, I think I was around 6 years old, my parents divorced. And so like the living situations were kind of tenuous, and I moved around a little bit. And my parents, they really, in those situations, looking back, I realized they did the best they could. Mm-hmm. And that it's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
So when I talk about this, I don't want it to seem like a commentary on that, because this is just my experience. But we were watching one of our kids perform. He's in 8th grade and performing a song and just absolutely crushing it. And I think later on he was like doing a dance number, and my dad leaned over to me and he was like, "What were you doing in 8th grade?" And it was kind of this like jokey sort of, which is funny because, to be fair, our 8th grader is a very talented, but also very hardworking kid. But he's also in circumstances that have allowed him to thrive.
Right. Exactly.
And I was only kind of thinking of the joke in that situation. And I said something like, because literally at that time I was in Colorado, living out in the country, going to a very small school that did not have an artistic program. And so I said something like, I was digging post holes for fences or something like that. But I thought about that later, and I was like, I when I moved to Texas in 10th grade, I found a group of kids and a community in my church that made me feel accepted and a place where I belonged. I discovered the art that was inside me, and I found a way to express that. And all of these things happened really quickly and suddenly that were very positive, that had been kind of pent up and really not allowed to surface before then.
Yeah.
And so it made me ask the question, like, what would it have been like if I had been in a different situation?
If you had started earlier, if you had had this training, if you had,
And
I do that all the time.
And it's not a commentary on, how good or bad the people in my life did for me. It's really just like, I think it's okay to acknowledge that. And I don't, not to sit and like feel sorry for yourself, but to say that is an actual loss.
Yeah.
There's something that was lost there, and it's okay to acknowledge that and to grieve that.
But also, like, look at how far you've come too,
Yeah.
In spite of all of those circumstances. Like, I have to remember that piece of it, because I would want to be farther along than I am now. But look at what we've overcome. Like, that is, I don't know.
I'm considering, because I'm about to start a sabbatical, which I'm kind of excited and also a little bit nervous about. But I've talked about this before. I'm considering writing kind of a concept album. But it's about those years that I lived in Colorado, and it would very much be kind of an exploration of some of the trauma, but it would also be expressing some of the other kind of positive things about childhood and stuff. But there's one song that I've been working on called, I think it's called Am I Strong? And we used to go out every once in a while, because we lived in a cabin. We used to go out to the woods and chop down trees and gather firewood for the winter. And so I was at that age where like we're picking up all the pieces of wood after they've been cut, and we're loading them into the trailer. And my brother and I are kind of like, trying to see who can carry the most pieces at the same, once going back to the trailer. And in my head, it was kind of a competition, but I also remember that kind of feeling of like, does my stepdad, who was kind of the more present father figure in that time period, does he think I'm strong enough? Does he think I'm like a hard enough worker? Does he think, and asking all of those questions. And then there's a turn in that song where I talk about, and so like, so it's like, do you think I'm strong enough? Look at how much I can carry. It's like about the firewood. But then there's a turn and it says, I am strong for all I've had to carry. And so it's kind of like, it's like what you're talking about, like embracing the ways that processing through the trauma has helped you actually become strong in a lot of ways, and in ways that help you carry things for yourself, but also for other people, so. That's like, it's amazing to me, because it is words, but it's also,
well, it's music.
The way
music is different.
Yeah. The way that it's expressed, I think, and in song, through melody, it just touches people in a way that you can't just like, talking to them.
Yeah. I mean, music moves you, stories move you. I can't tell you how many, I mean, you're always there. I still read aloud to our kids, and there's so many books that I get to a certain point and I'm like crying as I'm reading.
Yeah.
So movies, I always cry at movies. So there's just, there's something about art that just really touches on the deep places.
Outside of healing yourself and helping other people see their trauma and find new ways to express their trauma through the art that you share, I think one of the most powerful things that art can do is it can show people who haven't experienced those trauma, what the people in their life might be going through.
Yeah. And hopefully develop some empathy.
Yeah. Somebody in your life might be really struggling to express their trauma and their hurt. And so, if they're like, hey, you need to read this book, that might be, hey, there's something in here that will tell you what I'm going through that I just don't have the words to tell you. Yeah. So I think that, and ultimately, when we understand the burdens that each of us are carrying, the more understanding we have of that, the more empathy we have for one another, and the more we can help each other heal. I think that's kind of ultimately one of the most beautiful things about art.
Yeah.
Is it does promote this kind of collective healing.
It's really cool.
All right. Well, that was a heavy one to end the season on. We are going to
happy book birthday.
Yeah,
that's
happy book birthday. This is really an excellent book. I know we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think at any age you should read it.
Yeah.
It'll help you, it might resonate with some of the things you experienced, or it's going to help you understand the experiences of other people. And either way,
I can't tell you how many I've heard from kids already, but I'm hearing from like lots of adults who are like, I've had an experience like this,
Yeah.
Which is like an author's dream. So, and just, helping people process through that part of what they've experienced as well.
Yep. All right. So we'll leave you with that. If you want to check that out, you can go to racheltolson.com, and I know there's a link there.
Yeah.
Where you can pre-order the book. You can also go to any of your favorite local bookshops. That would be that's probably the best place you go, is like look for one of your local bookshops and try to pre-order it there.
Pre-order it there, yeah. Yep.
So we are going to close this season and have a little break, and we don't have a date yet for when we're going to start back up with the live streams, but we will announce that at some point. But yeah, we're about to go into the summer craziness, so just
that
in time
and
to
book launch time. So we've got both of those things happening at the same time. They're colliding.
Yeah. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And I hope that this show has done what we want it to do, which is be an encouragement, help you get unstuck, help you feel like you can actually create and share the things that you have inside of you. And when we come back, we'll do more of that.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you at some point in the future.
See you in September, maybe.
Maybe.
That's a song.
Oh, is it?
Isn't it? See you in September? Yeah. I think it's it's an oldies. Like, I don't think it was the Beatles. It was somebody else.
Okay. Well, we're going to stop and look that up. Now I'm curious.
Yeah. It's pretty sure.
Yep. And when we come back from the break,
we'll
let you know whether or not that's actually a song.
You can't do that. All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.